Can you all see this okay?
Yes.
Good.
Great. Okay, so this is a little bit about me. I just told you that I'm a director within the AT&T cybersecurity consulting practice, and I have a bunch of security certifications over the years. I've always done cybersecurity. I started off with a electrical engineering background and then got into cybersecurity as I was working in New York City and state for their criminal justice system, as well as 311 and 411. And I've been doing cybersecurity work that ranges from user training to doing risk assessments to performing penetration testing, across a number of our customers. And as AT&T, we service, small and large customers. SMB, businesses work with us to make sure that we're able to help them with their security challenges. With that, I want to kick it off by, showing you this password list, right? It's news and noteworthy because if you think about how in 2020, we still are using passwords, and most of the ones that have been broken into, 275 million passwords were leaked just this year. This is the top 10 in terms of the common passwords. So the reason I'm putting this out there is, we are all in this together. So cybersecurity today is everyone's responsibility, right? So it cannot be that, hey, I'm not IT, so I don't play a role in this, or I'm too small, who's going to come after me? These types of, mindset, is sort of the cause of the core of the issue. And think about security to be not just a technology problem, right? This is basically a people and process challenge as well. So if you look at this, sort of top 10 passwords, we could definitely do better than this, right? We all know today, we watch a TV ad that talks about identity theft. We know that, we should do better in terms of password. Yes, we would ultimately like to get to a password-less infrastructure, but by the time we get there, we still can take steps to alleviate some of this. So, for anyone out there, if you're ever using, any of the sites, not just critical sites, right? So one of the myths is, hey, I'm just using this on my Facebook account, or I just use this for Gmail, but I don't use it for my work. These are all types of passwords that are leaked out there. And if you take a look at the time to crack it, right? So when we put a password like this into our systems, and the fact that it doesn't even take a second to crack it, then you're basically opening your doors, to the malicious actor to come after you. So the mindset shift has to definitely take place, and we need to make sure that we are not using such weak passwords. And don't think of, anytime you're present online and you're putting a password in place, it has to be stronger. It should not just be, sort of the QWERTY on the keyboard. Don't just do easily guessable ones like your pet's name, even honestly today, even maiden name, right? With the type of social media that we have, I see folks even taking, sort of games that they play on social media sites where you're sort of putting in information. You're not really thinking about it from a security point of view, but that's exactly what the malicious actor is counting on. So a lot of us have played games on Facebook, when they'll say something like, hey, check out what your personality is. So give me your date of birth, right? They're not saying, oh, I'm going to ask you for all your private information, but they're going to use it in a way to manipulate, the information that you present there to be used for malicious purposes. So I wanted to, bring to attention that any of us that are listening in, today, and our family members, we have folks working from home. Today cybersecurity is at our kitchen table, right? I have 11-year-old, that's using his laptop and, doing schoolwork. And today security has to be at home and at workplace with our friends and family. So if you see someone, sort of choosing weak passwords, it could be our parents, but tell them the impact of that weak password. It's not to make everybody's life difficult. Oh, how am I going to remember all these passwords? I'm going to just put them on sticky notes and paste it everywhere. That doesn't help either, right? So you want to make sure you choose passwords that are not dictionary words, right? Like it has to be something that is unique to you and it is complex. Given that, I want to talk about how risk has changed for all of us, right? So whether you're a small business, large organization, have a full-blown IT team, don't have too many people supporting you for IT, every one of our organization's risk profile has changed. So it's time to sort of take a look at it from that risk point of view. And the reason we say that is, think about it, you know your business the best. So no amount of technology or tool is going to take away that knowledge. So the fact that you understand your business process and you understand, what data you hold that is, truly your crown jewels, think about how your risk profile has changed since March. We may have started off, I know organizations that, went and bought, new equipment, went and bought refurbished equipment, shipped it off to their employees, folks in call centers that are working, from home today, taking credit card information. You might be a healthcare organization, that is needing external support, so you've outsourced to a third party. A lot of things that we did starting March was to focus on functionality, not security. And rightfully at that point in crisis mode, that was the, sort of, pivot that John was talking about. So, but you think about it in terms of where we are today. Our normal, which is maybe our new normal, is to use all of this transformation that has taken place. So we are all going to be working from home for, the larger part of next year. We are all going to be thinking about how, we've started accepting new forms of payment. We have seen, like if you're ever thinking about, 2020, it's not only the year of COVID, it's also the year of transformation, where a lot of things that we never thought we would do online or, transact online has changed now, right? So we are all, shopping online. We are, getting our groceries online. Our, e-health is happening. So across all industries, every one of us, we have significantly changed in terms of how we transact. And that really, when crisis happens, cybercrime is fueled by crisis, right? So what happens is, we were talking about how attacks have evolved, right? So, what we are experiencing today is not all new, right? It's sort of, grown over the years. When I started doing security, 20 years ago, we were talking about how, somebody that, wants to sort of, get a reputation and sort of defame somebody else would sit in a garage with a hoodie, a script kiddie, typing code and, sort of causing damage. Today, this is a monetized industry. So why do we all need to care about it? It is just like, think about, fire safety. We all, every individual, when we do our fire drills, when we, think about fire safety while building our homes, we do this because we know that this is important and it's relevant to every, individual out there. Same goes for, cybersecurity. So the way I look at it when we talk with customers is equate cybersecurity to safety, if you will. So just like we take a fire drill seriously, we have to take cybersecurity seriously. So what has happened over the years is the way attacks have become monetized now. So if you think of cybercrime today, it is an organized, industry which is profiting. So you can actually go on the dark web and even get a ransomware kit, something malicious to be able to do against someone else for less than $20. So you don't have to really craft a new malware or be the world's best hacker. You could just get this to wreak damage on people, right? So, and on organizations. We know that under $20, you can actually find, ransomware kits on the dark web, and you'll also have customer support with it. So this is something that is prevalent out there. And to think that it's not going to happen to us because we are not a certain size, or, maybe we don't handle as sensitive of a data that you think, you have, that is not true. So, it used to be the case that, every malicious actor was after just credit card data. Today, even health information is more valuable on the dark web than a credit card data. 2 weeks ago, New York DMV, saw an attack where users were getting a message with a link on their phones, SMS message that came in that says, put in your, driver's license information to validate and update. Given COVID, we are not really taking anybody, in line at the DMV. A lot of folks, when, saw that, come into their phones, you're not always thinking about, the maliciousness of something like this. So it's important to be educated about what is happening out there from an SMS attack, from, now, we all know this, right? Your bank will never call you and ask you for your login information and password. That's a done deal. We all know that it never happens. But what if you got a link that says, put in your credentials here to test the strength of your password. A lot of people might fall for that, right? So think about most of the attack vectors that are happening today is focused on phishing. And the reason we're pointing this out is this is something that could happen to any of us. Even a cybersecurity individual, could get phished based on how crafty the folks that are sending out this email get. So if you have enough personal information that is sort of talking to the audience, just when we started this call, we talked about how COVID has changed our vacation plans and, how, we are not going on cruises anymore. But what if you got an email that talked to you about, post COVID-19, when you get on a cruise, click on this link, we are going to be able to send you a voucher, we are trying to bring our business back. Chances are, if something is tailored to you, you're going to, fall prey to that and click on it. So the key is, we are seeing a lot of fraud activity increase. We've seen customers come to us with, information that they've clicked on. And again, if you see something, say something in terms of physical security, holds good for online too. So when you're talking to your end users, we don't want to sort of instill the fear that, oh, don't ever click on this email, or if you see something like that and you cause the damage, that's the problem, right? You want to empower them to bring you that information. So how do you spot this, right? So how do you spot anything where when you see a phishing email, typically it will, sort of have a sense of urgency behind it. It will try to sort of, appeal to you from sort of an ethos, pathos, logos point of view, right? So it's going to have an emotional tie to it. Hey, would you donate to this charity? Hey, we have, sort of a payment that is due. Here is an invoice. Here is your, annual, pay raise, salary review, right? You have a tendency to click on those attachments. So those are the things that, you have to sort of be aware of and educate your own end users. So why do we say all this, right? The key is to start with a security first mindset. So every action that you take as an organization for your business, think about it from a security point of view, in the sense, not just, oh, who's going to breach me, or, how am I going to lose this data? Think also about what would happen, what is critical to you, which asset is the most critical, what type of data is the most critical, how will you actually know if you were breached? We're talking about how it takes a long time to detect a breach. So the key is, if you don't know what your baseline looks like in terms of normal traffic patterns, normal activity, then it's hard to spot an anomaly. So you need to have an assessment done from a risk point of view that really looks at where you are right now and what does risk look like for you from a security perspective. Where are your weaknesses? Because we all know that we cannot be spending a lot of money on security initiatives if they don't really align with your business objectives and what is it that you're trying to protect. I often say this, if you don't know where your critical assets are, it's very hard to come up with a security plan to protect them. So, a step back is to really sort of jot down, what are your assets? What do they look like today? What has happened since COVID? Where are your users logging in from? Where is your core data? And just because you have data in the cloud, you cannot think that your cloud provider is going to take care of it all. That's not always the case. So you have to have a responsibility model that you share with that cloud provider. You should know what they're going to take care of and what you're going to take care of. And really ask more questions. And it's okay to, really dig deeper and better understand, ask the tougher questions. So what would happen if this data gets lost? How would I know about it if this data is compromised? How do I make sure that you're backing this up? How do I make sure you're constantly monitoring? These are questions that, you should be asking as you're going through any of your initiatives from a business point of view. And the key is, I get asked this a lot from SMBs. I don't have all of the money to be able to comply with every framework out there. Where do I start? Start with a NIST cybersecurity framework. Again, you don't have to have everything in place, but you have to start somewhere and align somewhere so that you're able to prioritize and measure. This is, again, a free, available resource that is out there that gives you best practices. If you want to even start even smaller than that, the SANS Top 20 is a good one from a technical point of view that you can look at. So the key is, any transformation projects that you're going, anything that you're changing in terms of your large, business goals, you want to make sure that security is done from the get-go, like from the start. Think about, just like how you would think about, sort of availability of data, you have to think about the confidentiality of the data and integrity of the data. I'll give you this example. We had a small business set up a, website where, they were basically accepting credit card payments, and they would ship cameras. But they also had a B2B site that, they were not really securing as well. So the malicious actor, all the malicious actor was doing was just changing the shipping information. They didn't go and steal the credit card information. So instead of the shipping, only the shipping information was changed. So instead of the camera reaching, the right person, it would always go to this other warehouse. It took a while for folks to actually catch this, like what was going on. The customers were not getting it, but then, there was no visible compromise. So keep in mind that from a malicious actor's point of view, when you are looking at your own projects, think how you would break in. Think of all the weaknesses. Think about how, with inside information that you have, if you know where those gaps are, that's a great way to start and close those gaps. So I want to talk about, application security and making sure you have your infrastructure clean. 90% of all these breaches that we read about, those could have been prevented because most of them exploit vulnerabilities that are out in the open, patches available, right? So you can fix a lot of these. So think about how your wireless, infrastructure is secured. If you're using Wi-Fi, in your office site, and that, it's something that was set up in a hurry, you haven't really checked at it from a security point of view. We're talking about, about hosting, right? So again, a lot of us use WordPress. So it's important that, like he was mentioning, those plugins need to be updated. So you need to make sure that all of your assets that you have, you need to know where they are. And this includes, applications. This includes your mobile phones your employees are using. This includes, every asset that is part of your business needs to have an accurate inventory. And you need to make sure that you do a vulnerability assessment. So where do I stand today? What does my network look like? And how could somebody break it? Right? That is key. And don't forget social engineering, right? A lot of us think, oh, I have this email that is secure, and then I have this, phishing test that I keep doing. Social engineering is important because you want to use multiple scenarios. When a malicious actor, comes after you, they're not just going to use one vector to come after you. They're not just going to send one email and then stop, right? They're going to, try to get to that information from various aspects. Social engineering helps you, be able to gauge the strength of your own defenses. So it's key that, as an organization and as individuals, we are all sort of, prepared for what it looks like. The one key aspect is you have to think that you're already breached. You have to think that this is going to happen to you so that you prepare for it. It's not an if, but it's a when. So the key is you can quickly recover from this if you have planned. So if you don't know what your incident response plan looks like, or if you haven't updated it in a while, it's time to do that. And also think about running tabletop exercises. You can do this yourself, right? So suppose we got hit with a ransomware. What do we do? How do we go next? Who would I contact? How will I get the help? Who's going to, initiate this discussion with PR? Think through that plan, right? So I think that is key. I just want to get a time check. And I believe, this is my last slide, so at home, definitely do your part, right? So you want to make sure that, login information, passwords, shouldn't be out in the open. Don't collect it unless you absolutely need to. And, when you have data, it is your, job to protect that data, right? So don't keep collecting information that you are not going to be able to handle in terms of protection. Have a clean machine, right? So it's important, like a lot of us do this, when you hear the, sort of warning saying, update your machine, you're like, snooze, an hour later, 2 hours later, right? But that's not okay. You need to be able to have a clean machine, and definitely back up your data. And don't be sort of in this feeling that my cloud provider is backing all of my data, I'm taken care of. Most user license agreements call that out specifically, whether they're going to back up their infrastructure, are they going to back up your data, and how it is. And then I talked about owning our online presence. So whether you're shopping, whether you're on social media, whether you're, on, sort of groups on Facebook, you need to know what is it that you're sharing in that space, whether it is credentials, whether it is personal information, all of those things can be, used in a way. Most of the breaches that have happened, we see something called credential stuffing. So what happens there is they use the user and passwords that is already there that they will use to attack other websites. So if, we've all been there, right? Whether it is, large, organizations that have been compromised, whether it is credit bureaus, whether it is, social media, those passwords are there. So, so you have to change them when you see a breach, and make sure that you use a separate set of passwords for like shopping sites, a separate set of passwords for social media, another set for banking. Don't mix them all, and you should never be using all of the same passwords, and don't answer truthfully for all your sort of password reset questions. Because today, if I have enough time and I have Google, I can actually spot what your cat's name is, or what your pet's name is, where you went to high school. So those default questions, you shouldn't be answering them truthfully, because that's again information that somebody can find about you. And then Wi-Fi hotspots. So if you're in a coffee shop, if you're out somewhere, you shouldn't be just on those Wi-Fi and doing your work-related, tasks without being on a VPN. With that, I believe I'm good. And Ben, can I turn it over to Mitali?
Yeah, Jim, you want to move on to the next presenter?
Yeah, we'll have questions at the end, so start jotting down any comments or questions you have, so we can send it out to everyone. All right, so yes, Natalia, if you would like to take over at this point.
Yeah, I'm just going to share the screen and then. Okay, so today we are talking about cybersecurity in a remote workplace environment. So the topics I would be going over is what today's workplace looks like, a look into cybercrime, COVID-19 cyber threat highlights, some best practices for IT security. I'll bring in some HIPAA stuff and how to get compliant, and choosing a right partner if you're not sure if you want to do it yourself, right? So what is today's workplace? We have many organizations who has chosen to do telework, and with COVID-19 intensifying and onsetting, it sort of pushed everybody to the edge to go remote and work. Another factor, there are a lot of organizations where people are working from different work locations. So even though you have an office location, you work from different locations as telecommuting, and that contributes to something called a distributed workplace. Now, with COVID onset, this whole concept of teleworking and distributed workplace has pushed some really unprecedented need to look at cybersecurity in an extremely short period of time. We were at one point working from office, and then 2 weeks later, everything shuts down and you're pushed to work from home or take off, things like that. And then, there were challenges that cybersecurity brought in with the new environment, where homes, the workplaces, even though they were secured, homes, their network wasn't. So that sort of posed an open pipe towards looking at things differently. Now, another factor that you need to factor into this whole mix is some organizations also say bring your own device, or BYOD, where organizations are saying, okay, you can bring your cell phone in, but you can also check your work email. Now, cell phones may or may not have the adequate protection so that your emails don't get hacked. One of the biggest things is checking your email. Now, one of the things that some of these organizations are really looking into to see how to mitigate some of these cybersecurity risks so that the organization is now cyber resilient That is a new term that is walking around in the IT industry, being cyber resilient, taking to make sure that your network is always protected, be it remote, be it work location. Now, there are a couple of factors that follow these guidelines, and in the medical industry, HIPAA law is something that is pretty prevalent. And IT infrastructure is rolled out using something called Cybersecurity Framework. There is nothing like HIPAA compliancy for IT. We follow certain framework, for certain rules, certain way of doing things, which the Cybersecurity Framework put as a guideline. And NIST.gov is where you can go and check out how certain things are put together to be able to be protected. NIST guidelines also provide certain level of regulations for the FINRA-related companies who have a lot of personal information related to taxes, related to finances, related to anything that has to do with money. Now, how do we look at a cybercrime? It has three parts to it. You have the surface web, we have the deep web, and we have the dark web. The dark web is the place where your stolen credentials are traded. It's pretty premium price over there, and once those credentials are stolen or are traded and it's out in the market for people to use, they come to the surface web, where you have Yahoo, Google, Bing, CNN, any portal that deals with credentials. And that makes the web life pretty interesting, which Jim was mentioning in the past. You know, your plugins need to be updated, up to date. If not, you know, there are chances of it getting hacked. One of the things that people also ignore is some of these browsers, like Chrome browsers, Explorers, Firefox, they have updates. People forget to update their browser, which sort of also opens up to some of these crimes that check to see if your browser is up to date, and certain things, certain plugins within the browser can be opened up as a portal hole. And then once they get access to your credentials, they use that to get into deep web to get more information, which is your academic databases, your medical records, your financial records, your legal documents, anything. And that's where the 96% of the movement happens between dark web and deep web. It's a cyclical process where they get information from the bottom, go up to the top, try to get into the middle. And more information they get from the deep web, the more it gets traded in the dark web. It's a vicious cycle. It's almost 197 days in an average time length that it takes for an organization to identify that they had a data breach. 197 days. That's a long time for you to not know that your credentials have been stolen. There is a normal practice that everybody follows, or at least we within the IT organization that we follow. Try changing your password every 90 days. It keeps you safe. Now guess what? It takes 19 minutes to escalation. Russian hackers are the best out there. They can pull any information within that factoring time and you wouldn't even know about it. That's not a good sign for your business. Now the threat highlights. What are the threat highlights? They normally target teleworking employees through phishing emails, through meeting invites, through fake terminations. An example, recently there was an email that got sent out as a phishing email to some of the Microsoft Office 365 subscription-driven clients saying, your subscription is about to expire. Please click here to renew your subscription. It looked very legitimate. It had a Microsoft Office 365 logo. It had banners. It had disclaimers. But they embedded one very sensitive link in there, which sort of got tucked into the entire email. So one of the things we try training users saying, do a mouse over on all those links to see if anything looks suspicious. So a training is something that would have helped not getting hacked. Now, employees who are alarmed with some of these messages, then they may not scrutinize these spoofed emails. Like I said, if they would have clicked on that, it would have taken them to a fictitious site, which would have gathered information out of your browser. And these emails, they entice victims to click some of these malicious links. Like I said, the Microsoft link had a very sensitive link where you could click on it and it would take you to a site which would have gathered all the information from your system, from your browser. Pretty much depends on how the vector is working against you. Coming to some of the best practices for IT security. Try using multi-factor authentication when you try logging in, because that sort of helps a lot of invalid logins into your account. Don't try using same passwords across these sites like Microsoft, Wells Fargo, which is a banking place, Facebook, which is a social media place, Google, which is your personal email, which normally everybody uses, Microsoft, which is your business, Adobe, where you also do use it for digital signatures and handwritten signatures. So some of these, if you keep the password separately, it would be of great beneficial for you. Don't share. You don't share anything. You don't share passwords. You don't share Wi-Fi networks. You don't share cross networks. If you are at a client site and if you would like to use your computer, try using your hotspot on your phone. Most of the telephone companies today, they do have endpoint protection over the network, where they recognize, even though it's a public network, they do recognize your data connection, and it is protected. You're better off using your hotspot on your phone than connecting to coffee shop place like Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's. Most of the hackers are sitting somewhere around your chair in Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, sniffing the network. So the best option is to use your hotspot. Again, this is a big one. Do not save your passwords in any of the browsers. That's the easiest place to sniff information. Change your passwords frequently. A recommendation is between 60 to 90 days. It would be the best if you keep changing your business password. Have your IT provider force it if there is a way to put in some sort of a policy in there within your network to force every user to log off every 60 days or 90 days and have them change their password upon the next login. Again, follow and look for guidelines that if you think that you've been hacked, report immediately. Do not wait, because your information has already been traded as soon as it has been extracted. Now, coming to HIPAA. What is HIPAA? HIPAA is an insurance requirement that was put in place back in 1996 to have medical businesses stay on par with the changing industry we have. There are 5 major rules that they follow. First, privacy rule. It mandates you protect all health information of an individual in any form that is possible. 2, security rule. We have electronic medical records, which are distributed across different places. You have to make sure you keep track of the administrative policies against it, physical location policies against it, and then technical security policies against it. Transactions and code sets. It addresses the transaction standards that you use to communicate just within the healthcare. How do you notify your patients? How do you communicate with your patients with regards to any test results that come back? those are defined in the transaction code sets. Unique identifier rule. You need to make sure that you standardize across your business how you cover your entities. Entities meaning everybody has somebody who's doing their billing. Do you have a BAA with them? And somebody has their IT doing. Some of these information are cross shared. So do you have that information secure? So these are few things that are covered under unique identifier rules. Last, enforcement rule. How do you enforce some of these? You need to make sure the privacy and the security rules are across everybody. So in case you are audited, there are huge penalties for some of these holes if they find out. Those are called HIPAA violation penalties. Now there are 4 steps to get compliant for HIPAA, and you can stay compliant that way. There is every year, some of the bigger organizations, they do have HIPAA audits by their financial auditors. So there are ways to get HIPAA compliant and stay compliant. One, you perform privacy and security compliance assessments. You need to make sure your passwords are, policies are put in place for password changes. You don't cross-platform, you do not use the same password. If you were to implement single sign-on, who is accessing what information? Do you have certain level of scrutinization of who is accessing patient information? So some of these things are addressed in the privacy and security compliance assessment. Then enforcing them. That is one of another thing that you have to make sure that when your business organization accesses some of this information, that they do have the right permissions to access the patient information, patient health records, things like that. Third one, you need to make sure you train all your workforce members to comply. Every year, there is something called HIPAA training. It happens in the 4th quarter of every year, between October through December, because at that time, a lot of work load reduces. So that would be the best time to make sure that your workforce members are HIPAA trained. Do's and don'ts. Being a HIPAA compliant company, we do provide this as one of our services for our customers. And then you can maintain ongoing HIPAA compliance program by making sure, your IT company comes in, make sure all these policies are put in place, all these policies are enforced. You train your workforce members, and voila, you're good to go. Now, finding the right IT partner. HIPAA compliant managed services are a little different from rest of the world. We have something called Marathon, where we are constantly monitoring your devices. So this is basically, we are taking care of devices from viruses, Trojans, and also malware. Then we have something called disaster recovery and backup. Like Bindu mentioned, that if you're using cloud services, your SaaS provider do not back your data up. The backup of your data is an onus on you. They do a backup, yes, but they do a backup based on the requirement for their infrastructure. If you rely on that backup, chances are that if you have a data loss, you will not get your data back. So that is something you need to consider. Then we also do something called secure. We have network management, firewalls, routers, access points. Access points are the biggest spots where somebody can hack into your network, and firewall protects you from that. So everything is encompassed within that network. Then the last thing is called something called anti-spam. Your emails are the biggest backdoor to your organization from the hackers. You need to have adequate protection within your email spam to make sure that it does not allow some of these emails that come in with spammed links, so it can extract data from your browser. So if they can be kept outside the door, that is the best place to keep. Just as you have ADT or some sort of a theft protection network set up for protecting your house, consider your business to be your house where you're using some of these tools to protect your business data. Your business data is your biggest asset. You want to make sure that it is protected using a firewall, it is protected using a backup, and it is protected from viruses and spamware. Now, how do we achieve a culture of compliance? What do we do? HIPAA requirements enforces a law that you have to put in privacy and a security officer. You use some level of training so that your business associates have, this thing fresh in their mind that they know what they're doing. If in case there is an issue, they know what to do. So something like a training, a phishing campaign. Launch a phishing campaign within your organization to make sure that the users understand that they need to make, even though the email seems to be an urgent nature, that they not panic and that they read through the entire email and make sure that they're not clicking anything fictitious. Then minimization of risks. Try encrypting all data wherever possible, which is medical records, primarily for HIPAA. If it has to do with FINRA, it is going to be your transaction records, your trading records, if it is an accountant, it's going to be your tax filings. Make sure those are encrypted. A lot of folks use Lacert and Drake. So these organizations, they have certain regulations put in place so that your data, when it's transmitted, is secured. Try not to jump over and say that, okay, I have figured out a way how to handle this, so I don't have to worry about, not follow the process. But by jumping over the fence and not following the process, you're exposing yourself to the elements which may not work to your benefit. Next thing, eliminate common usernames and logins and passwords. There is something that is, if I use multiple users, I've got to pay more. If you're sharing users, God forbid if that gets ever hacked, you can shut down that user and you can move on to the next user. But if that is the only user within your organization being used for some of these applications, you've just created yourself a bad actor, which will work against you. So keep that in mind. You try minimizing risks as much as possible. And then you control the data. Recognize each client to be different, right? Not one size don't fit all. You have to make sure that whichever website you're using, whatever location you're saving your data, you save your data based on what your needs are, or your business needs. So the access control to it, you put in encryptions, all those factor into keeping the bad actor out of your business organization data.
Yeah.
And that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand it over to John.
All right, thank you. John, you ready to
Yeah.
talk
I
to
am.
us?
I should be off mute, and I will get this shared out.
Just, I had John Calli said he was having problems with the PowerPoints running a little slow. Is anybody else having a problem?
Mine's been fine. Jim?
Okay, yeah, I think John's might have a little issue with his connection.
I think some of the transitions and some of the slides might have been a little slow. I noticed that myself, just on one or two, but yeah, that could have been the transitions between slides and the updates in the slides.
Okay, so folks, you're not losing anything as far as their presentation, then that's the important thing.
Okay, so here we go, third presentation. Same topic. And as I introduced myself before, John LeMay, founder and principal here at Ocean Tech. And we focus not just on the cybersecurity, but also the IT management and digital readiness, digital transformation. So you'll see some of that throughout the slides as we get through here. Looking back at what happened, and we've talked about this throughout the presentations today, you know, we saw this sudden shift to remote work. It was disruptive to business. It was unavoidable, unfortunately. Some companies were better prepared for this than others. Companies that had plans in place for how to work remotely, or that were already doing so for some of their staff, had an easier time transitioning to that, and they continued to be able to deliver their customers, to innovate. Others had challenges in coming up to speed with the remote work environment, and being able to protect their business assets, their business data primarily, being able to manage that access, ensure it was done in a secure way. You know, the communications between teams were disrupted. Everyone switched from face-to-face meetings or meeting in a room to a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of conference calls. There were business processes that needed to be modified, or in some cases completely reworked, because of folks not having access to data, documents, things that were stored in the office. Maybe those were or weren't online, so maybe things need to be imaged and made available online. Delivery of the IT support services was changed, in that if you were used to having a local IT support person, now you may be working with that person remotely. If you were already used to working with remote IT support staff, perhaps the IT support staff were used to working, or that individual working in an office space, and now that person is working from home. So there are different things in the home, different network considerations, different other devices sharing the network to be concerned with. So those were new challenges that companies had to come up into space with. We've been talking today about a lot of the cybersecurity things that we can do. What are we going to protect for? And Bindu touched on a couple of these, and Mitali as well. I'm going to kind of sort of highlight some of the concerns that I thought were important to this audience. You know, looking at the small business market, small mid-sized businesses, 43% of all cyber attacks are targeting small business. That's a significant amount. So as been talked about today, if you think you're too small, you're not, and this statistic sort of shows that, right? 43% of those attacks are coming after the small business market. Those folks see the small business market as not being as able to protect against cybercrime. They don't have the capabilities necessarily larger organizations do. They don't have the resources to put at that. So they're seen as low-hanging fruit, which makes it all that more important that we do everything we can to protect the small and mid-sized business. 91% of those breaches originate in email. We've talked a lot today about email. This is why. Those breaches are coming. If we can address email through email sanitation, through end user training, we can reduce the likelihood of a breach significantly. Mitali brought up 197 days to detect. My research came up with 206. Those are within a margin of error, I think. So, you know, we're looking at a significant amount of time just to detect that a breach has occurred in your organization. And then how long does it take after that? It's another, you know, a little more than 2 months. We say 73 days here based on the research done by Citrin Cooperman earlier this year. So, you know, we're looking at 6, 7, 9 months now by the time a breach occurred to when we detect it and we can actually contain it and begin to look at moving on from that. A small business could take a couple weeks to recover from that. You could see people sent home unable to work while we're restoring data. There's a significant cost to that. You may need to purchase additional hardware to recover from your existing systems if they've been encrypted or otherwise compromised. For a small mid-sized business, that can approach 3 million, 2.65 million on average. From these numbers earlier this year is what a breach will cost a smaller mid-sized business. So it is significant. It is something this is why we're talking about all the possible ways to protect and all the things we really need to do and keep an eye on. The number one rule, protect your data. Protect your data is paramount, and you'll see that throughout this presentation. This is the critical point. If we protect the data first, if we consider the data in everything we do, everything else will sort of fall in line. We still have to maintain it. We still have to stay on top of it. We still have to monitor it. But if our focus is on protecting the data, it helps define how we handle the other risks. So if we look at the key risk areas, and a lot of these have been touched on already today, first and foremost, the most important thing is investing in security awareness training for employees, ensuring that any partners or any vendors that you deal with are also investing in security awareness training for their employees. And this should be delivered on a regular basis. It's not a one-time deal. It's ongoing. The threats are evolving. The training needs to continue to evolve as well. We've talked a lot about weak passwords and sharing and reuse of passwords. It's another major risk area. Make sure you have a good password policy in place. We talked about multi-factor authentication, how to use that. I have additional slides where we'll go into a little more depth on each one of these key risk areas. But we've talked about multi-factor or two-factor authentication. They're the same thing. Areas that you can't control, such as home or public Wi-Fi, you still need to be concerned with them. You can't manage them, but there are ways to protect against them. If your users are using personal devices, if employees were sent home to work and they were allowed to work from their own personal computers, that presents its own unique set of challenges that need to be monitored and addressed. And finally, data access controls, controlling who has access to what data in your organization is important. Making sure that someone doesn't just have access to everything. Making sure job roles are defined and making sure that we control and make sure that individuals have access only to the data that they need access to in order to perform their job duties. So let's dive into each one of these a little bit more. When you look at a security awareness training program, there's plenty of sources that are professionally developed for this. It can be delivered online. Prior to the pandemic, it could be delivered on premise for your employees. Most of that's being done live via webinars now, but there's also pre-recorded content that could be used. But the idea is to make sure you're using professionally developed training. Don't try to do this on your own, because these folks are out there staying on top of the latest threats and how security is evolving, or cyber threats are evolving, and how to evolve security to match. I mentioned we want to do this on a frequent basis. We want to do this on a continuous basis, maybe once a month, maybe every quarter, do something with security training to make sure your employees are aware of it. We're supporting that training, and they're continuing to get the latest information available. There's some tools out there that can actually test your security awareness training program by sending emails to your users to say, test them and see if they'll click on the link that's in the test email. And then it collects that data and reports back to you, so you know, are we doing enough from around security awareness training? So you can actually get some metrics back and plan your training based on how your users are responding to what you're already delivering. And again, as I already mentioned, these threats are constantly evolving. So make sure your training materials are up to date. Make sure they're fresh, so that your users are well prepared for whatever they happen to see next. Email, phone calls, there's plenty of intrusion points into the business, and we want to make sure that those are all covered. We've also talked today about password management policies. One point that I didn't hear bring up so far was administrator accounts. Administrator accounts are very common in applications, in core infrastructure components such as user directories, such as network devices. Protect those especially well. We don't want to share those admin accounts or admin rights with everyone in the organization. We want to make sure those are protected. We want to make sure that any policy, which should be a written policy that's put in place, encourages use of strong or complex passwords, and that those are changed frequently. We've talked about changing them frequently and not using common passwords today. We want to make sure that those are maintained, that those are constantly changing. Some tools are available that if you use a lot of online applications, SaaS applications, websites, there are some tools available that will actually report to you when those services have encountered a breach, so that you will know, well, hey, Microsoft had a breach. We need to change our passwords that are up on the Microsoft site. So you may want to take a look at taking advantage of those services to let you know when that's happened. Your password policy should make sure that folks are not sharing passwords in your organization. Every user should have their own account, as has already been discussed. Users shouldn't have a need to share passwords for a specific account, and if there is, that should be looked at to try to resolve that. Every user should have at least one account if they require administrator privileges to an application. You may want to consider giving them a second account with those administrator privileges so they're not using them all the time. That's important as well. We talked about recycling passwords already. Don't use the same passwords over and over. Ensure that your password policies that are put in place prevent users from simply resetting their password, using the same password over again. Or even using a slight variant, just adding a number or incrementing a number at the end of it. We want to avoid that because they're just too simple to crack. One thing we didn't talk too much about, although Bindu talked about it a little bit in her presentation, I believe, was the idea of using a password manager. These are very common for folks to use personally. You can have them on your phone or on your desktop that let you put your passwords together and track your passwords for different accounts. They are useful. They do have their own levels of security, and I have seen very good results with them. There's 3 or 4 that come to mind off the top of my head. LastPass, 1Password, or a couple of them. I haven't seen that they have had a lot of exploits. So those are probably, good choices for personal use. However, when you come to a business, there are actually specific products available that will let you do this and share those passwords from that vault to a group of users in a secure manner. So the user will authenticate to the vault, have access to specific passwords. They may not even need to be able to read the password. They could simply copy and paste it out of there without ever seeing what the password is. So it helps you as a business protect your passwords a little more than just giving the user the password where they are likely to write it down or something like that. Using an enterprise or a business password vault can help protect those passwords a little more. We talked about multi-factor authentication. We want that implemented across critical systems. Your login process should use multi-factor or 2-factor authentication. So the user enters their user ID and password and is then presented with a challenge. It says, do something else. A lot of the common multi-factor authentications are on people's phones, which everyone has with them today, so it's a good choice. And it'll pop a code up in that application, or it'll just pop up and accept deny in that application. The user just has to click that on their phone. So we now know that they've entered their password, and we're pretty sure that password's not stolen because we've also contacted the user's mobile device for that confirmation. Most modern login systems, as well as applications, have some way to integrate with multi-factor authentication. One thing to be aware of that we didn't talk about when we talked about multi-factor earlier today, choose the authenticator app method, like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. Authy is a third option. Don't use the option to send a PIN to your phone number, because phone numbers can actually be hijacked So a bad actor can actually hijack your phone number and redirect that PIN to some device that they have, and you would never know, and they've just logged in with your multi-factor authentication, bypass your security completely. So make sure you're using one of the authenticator application methods, as opposed to the simple sending of a PIN, which was more common a few years ago. A lot of banks and everything have moved away from that model now for that reason. We've talked a lot about home and public Wi-Fi risks. We mentioned VPNs can help protect against that. So if you have a device that you're giving your users to use from home or from another location, libraries, cafes, if the VPN is active on it, that helps with another layer of security. But some of the issues with the home and public Wi-Fis, first of all, as a business, you're not managing those, you're not in control of those. So if they have weak Wi-Fi passwords, which is very common, or if the network names or even the passwords themselves are based on the physical address of the home or location, or maybe the family name or surname is used as the network name, that's providing too much information. It makes it very easy for people to figure out what they're connecting to if they see that name advertised. So we want to encourage people to use something else as network names and make sure their passwords are up to date. Make sure that they are complex, I should say. Wi-Fi routers and access points need to be updated. They have firmware that can be updated on a regular basis. It's provided by the manufacturers for a couple of years after the devices are produced usually. Those are devices that people don't really consider, especially in their homes, updating, but they can be a significant security hole. We've already mentioned today how access points can be a security hole. Updating them with the latest firmware, as well as having a good password on it, can help protect against that. Finally, besides the VPN, what we can do with the device that the user's using is to use good endpoint protection. So all the security systems that usually run on servers or run in the office, by putting good endpoint protection, and what that means is the agent that is sitting on the laptop or desktop computer that the user is actually using. Having that good endpoint protection software used to just be antivirus software. Now it's antivirus, anti-malware. Now it's even more than that. It monitors a lot of things and can alert when problems occur on that endpoint. So having a good endpoint protection program can help protect your data, even when folks are on networks that are not necessarily well protected. And as Vitaly mentioned, a lot of times if you're in a public space, those bad actors are sitting right next to you. So we want to make sure that data is protected at that endpoint. Keep the protection as close to the data as possible. If as a business you're allowing users to log in with personal devices, there's significant risk here because you are not in control, similar to with their home networks, with their home computers. You're not in control of what is on them, how often they're being updated, whether or not they have any type of antivirus software, what other applications are on there, if it's being used for gaming, for just general web use. Those are things that can present other threats to your business and put your data at risk. So it's better to provide users with a dedicated work laptop with a set of policies and with good endpoint protection on them to prevent them from using their machines as just general purpose computing. There are other things in the home that are just worth mentioning. We haven't brought those up today, but with Internet of Things, the new IoT buzzword, we're talking about things like smart TVs and speakers, the Alexas and things like that that are in the homes that prevent additional attack surface for bad actors to access and potentially access data that's on that home network or public network. So using a home PC, its chances is going to have good access to those other smart devices. We want to limit that as much as possible. And again, a good endpoint protection program, good endpoint protection software, and good monitoring policy can help mitigate that. Controlling access to data, again, data protection is paramount. It's the number one thing we want to do. And we talk about controlling access to data. I've already touched on a little bit. We want to talk about things that have to do with making sure that you have a clear understanding of what job roles there are in your organization, and each individual in those roles has access to only the data that they need to do their job role. Trying to break that up so that one person doesn't have access to everything, or their one account doesn't have access to all of the data in the organization. Want to limit that as much as possible so that any breach of one specific account doesn't provide access to all of the crown jewels, to use another term that was used earlier. Want to make sure that employees can do their job, but at the same time that we're ensuring the business is protected. We haven't talked too much about encryption, although it was brought up earlier. If there's sensitive data in your organization, if that data is part of a database, or if it's files stored on a file server, consider encrypting that data if it contains information that's critical to your business or that is sensitive information about your clients or customers. While that data is stored or at rest, as we refer to it, it can be encrypted and require some additional access controls, passwords, and the like to get at that data. We can encrypt portions of databases and not encrypt other portions. We can encrypt some files, but not all files. So we have some flexibility there to provide special protection through encryption for specific data. And when we talk about data in transit, if we're copying that data from one place to another, we want to make sure that that data is protected as it's flowing. That's why we see a lot more websites are using HTTPS, secure HTTP now, instead of regular HTTP that we were used to using a few years ago. That data is being encrypted from the web server to your browser. So we want to use those same techniques to ensure that that data can't be sniffed, or what we're talking about when we say sniffing a network is actually capturing the data that's flowing across the network and presenting it on a screen to a user who's looking at it, or who can read it later. They could save that and take a look at it at some later time. So we want to protect that data all the time, ensure as much as possible that that data is not being exposed for folks to see. And once again, proven endpoint protection. All your workstations, if you're still using servers, you haven't migrated away from the file server or application server model into SaaS, there's endpoint protection for server roles as well. So all of those endpoints can be protected using similar endpoint protection software and rule sets. So we can customize things like that to suit your needs. And finally, I just want to touch on maintenance. And we've talked a little bit about this today too. Just making sure that proper hygiene, proper maintenance, proper monitoring is being done. We want to make sure that patching is happening on a regular basis. Microsoft, I believe it was last week, just released their last batch of monthly patches for the year. And every vendor sort of has the same model where they release patches on a monthly basis. Those should be reviewed and then applied in an automated fashion in most businesses. We don't want to rely on someone remembering to go in and patch this specific application or this group of servers. At the same time, we don't necessarily recommend automating updates on servers the way we do on desktops. A lot of times, desktops, you see the pop-up and say apply patches now. On servers and network devices, switches, routers, access points, we want to make sure that patch process is managed and then monitored to make sure it was successful, and if it wasn't successful, find out why. So it's more of a manual process for the servers and network devices, but we should be doing that on a regular basis. We talk about monitoring, and monitoring systems tend to give a lot of alerts. Any alerts that come back should be managed by your IT operations team, whether it's internal or external. There should be some ongoing, at least daily, review of any new alerts to make sure that anything that the monitoring systems detected are being addressed. If the alerts are sitting there and they're not being addressed, they're not helping you. We're not taking advantage of that system to protect your business, which is the point of having those monitoring systems in place. I mentioned warranties, and warranties on software and hardware. They're important in many cases because, and especially true with software, requires some type of a support agreement or a warranty to ensure that you're continuing to get updates for that software. And the same thing with hardware when we talk about firmware and drivers and things like that. We want to make sure it's all up to date. Companies provide these updates on a regular basis for some limited period of time, and many times you need to be on the latest or maybe one version back of a particular piece of software in order to continue to get all the security updates and fixes. So if we monitor your warranties to say, we know all the warranties are in place, everything's current, all the software agreements are current, then you're likely still able to get all the patches that the vendor releases for that software or hardware. You want to make sure that those are all applied, and in order to make sure they're available, make sure those agreements are in place. And we've talked a lot about policies, whether we're talking about data use policies for protecting the data, password policies, other security controls that are important for your organization. Ensure those things are documented. They're written down someplace so they can be reviewed, whether it's by new employees or just through a regular annual review process that you go through to just make sure everything is up to date, current. And we did talk about enforcement of those. So the policies can be written down and we can have all the policies in place, but if no one's actually checking to make sure they're enforced, then are they actually doing anything for you? So again, make sure, identify what policies you want to put in place to help control and mitigate risk, and document those, keep them up to date, and make sure there's some way to check that they're being followed and enforced. It's important. And I think my summary slide, just sort of talking about everything that I've rolled into here, which I've gone through rather quickly in the interest of time. Again, protecting data is paramount. Providing security awareness training for your employees, and making sure your vendors are doing the same for theirs, partners are doing the same for theirs. These are the best ways to help ensure that your business remains protected. Having strong password policies, multi-factor authentication, protecting against what you cannot control, those public networks and using personal devices to access your company data. Those are large, significant risk areas that we can use endpoint protection to help work around, because you're not in control of those things that are not owned by your company, your business. Making sure that the proper maintenance is happening around software updates, patching, making sure the monitoring systems are being reviewed on a regular basis, and then any alerts are being addressed so they don't just sit there and you realize at some point later that we had the alert, we never did anything with it. Could be a problem down the road. And that is it. So thank you for listening, and I'll toss it back over to Jen.